Good afternoon and welcome to today's Tropics for May 15th, 2020. Please note I'm not a meteorologist and this video is just a collection of my thoughts and opinions about the storms I'm talking about. And as always, please contact National Hurricane Center or your local officials for any decision making. Today I'm looking at Invest 90L, which is a disorganized system in the Western Atlantic, and Invest 91B, which is a more organized tropical disturbance in the Bay of Bengal. So let's start with Invest 90L. So it's not really that organized. There is a trough of lower pressure, generally extending from this convective area down to the southwest into the northern Caribbean, and it has produced a general weak vortex that's now shearing out and isn't really much of anything now, but it is producing obviously a curvature where you have southerly winds from the Caribbean, which is causing some warm air advection into the Bahamas kind of region eastward, and also this then turns to more of an east-northeasterly flow as it meets the ridge overhead and this baroclinic zone. And as I just mentioned, this baroclinic zone extends around here and into Florida, and basically is a result of the warm air from the Caribbean meeting cooler air that is coming from the north and is coming with the ridge actually, and as a result you have that warm air overrunning the cooler air, and you have cloudiness and some thunderstorms that are causing rain that is currently moving into Florida with that easterly flow. As you may have noticed, there is an overlap where there is a trough and there's also convection. This is actually kind of a sweet spot for convection. It has an upper trough that I'm going to mention soon. It also has the trough at the surface that is also going to help produce some convection, and is near this baroclinic zone, so it's basically got three different ways that convection is forming, and as a result, with this surface convergence and some of the upper level divergence and the convection, you're going to need to have the vortex stretched with the rising air, and this vortex stretching will make it smaller and intensify it, so it will take the vorticity in the trough and possibly cause a new vortex to form after the old sheared out one pretty much dies off. And since this is a good area for convection, it is now moving to the northeast with a short wave that is just kicked that way just earlier today, is likely to be a low center that persists and possibly causes an actual organized subtropical or tropical cyclone depending on the track and where it moves. Let's take a look at the infrared imagery. There is convection here, and after being in the Florida Straits since yesterday evening, has since moved northeast due to that shortwave trough that I mentioned earlier. And here is a visual of that upper level trough. It extends from the Gulf of Mexico and then up into Florida, or around Florida, and then meets Invest 90L. This trough is generally negatively tilted, so you do have the southerly shear, or light southerly shear at least, that is affecting 90L right now. And this trough will continue to move with 90L and continue to ventilate it and generally help it or have some convection. Looking in the future, it does appear that we'll see the low start to reorganize towards the north where there is convection, and again this will be permanent because it has a better area where its convection can continue to form, and with this upper level divergence which is causing some rising air in this moisture pocket, you might see the vortex able to actually persist. There's possibility it does go tropical because it looks subtropical at first because it is interacting with non-tropical or baroclinic forces. And while we'll still continue to deal with it, as you can see, even 72 hours out, so this is Monday morning, at least Eastern time, and this there's still the upper level divergence that it benefits from, but at the same time, you see the more moist, warmer air that is starting to wrap around the low and occlude. And if that warmer air that's coming from come from the south is allowed to wrap around the low, it might become more of a warm core system, which would make it fully tropical rather than a subtropical type of structure. And that could happen earlier. That could happen, maybe never. But it also depends on its track, because if you do get a more westerly track closer to the coast, it will interact with the Gulf Stream more, and the waters are a lot closer to being friendly for tropical development. And with the cold upper level temperatures, you do have higher lapse rates. So that means you'll end up having more convection that is tropical or barotropic in nature rather than baroclinic with the jet interaction. So with that, you'll have a warmer core system and more more likely a tropical structure. So it would be a tropical depression or storm. But if you have a more easterly track, such as if it forms more east in the convective area, or it just takes a more easterly track, it will have cooler waters south of the Gulf Stream, which means you'll have less instability, and it relies more on the baroclinic upper divergence rather than the lapse rates between the sea and the heat content in the sea and the upper levels. So you might get less latent heat release type strengthening and more subtropical type strengthening. So it might be more subtropical if it takes the track more east. As for the impacts, they'll be relatively minor. It's mostly just rain because, as a result of this baroclinic zone that has formed, and with that easterly flow north and west of that tropical of the trough, then you'll end up getting get the east wind also with ridge to the north. That means the baroclinic zone is able to nose into Florida and cause some rain. There will also be some higher waves and some breezy winds near the coast as a result of 90L. But yeah, the main impact is already occurring. It's some rain, which is actually kind of beneficial because a lot of Florida is in a drought. So any rain like this is good. However, it has caused some flooding in areas like Miami, where the rain is too heavy and the drier ground can't absorb it. So, as you can see in the forecast from the National Weather Service, it looks like most of the rain should stay away from the United States except for eastern and southern Florida. And the Bahamas will also get some of that rain, but most of it should stay offshore and just be relegated to the western Atlantic Ocean. Next up, I'm looking at Invest 91B, which is a tropical disturbance in the Bay of Bengal. Right now it's like a monsoon low, so it's pretty broad right now. And so it's not a tropical depression, even though it has some convection over it, over that center, just around this area. But the center, at least at this point, doesn't seem to be well defined. So it is still just an invest, but with the convection actually firing over the low-level center, or what you call a broad center, more like, it is starting to organize, it looks like, it with pressure falls as a result of this deep convection. So it might become a tropical depression soon. And once we actually have a concentrated trackable low, it'll be easier to see what the track will be, which is quite important because that also has a big impact on the impacts that 91B will have. As you can see, there's just a ton of convection right now out there. The MJO is active in the Indian Ocean, so this makes sense why there's so much convection just dominating the complete bottom half of, or bottom left corner of this image. And here is Invest 91B. It'll likely split off and head to the northeast. And again, conditions are really favorable. There's a bit of dry air, so if we're lucky, that might stunt the development a bit. But the shear is low and looks to remain low. You can already see that right now. The outflow is going in all different directions. You can tell it's not at all being limited in any direction. So that is a sign that the shear is pretty low. And in addition, the water temperatures are very, very warm. They are around 30 degrees Celsius or above, so that's the upper 80s. Pretty much the entire track it's going to have. So it's going to have very deep convection unless it gets interrupted significantly by dry air, and that might allow it to organize quickly in a rather favorable environment headed to northeastern India or Bangladesh. And the impacts are a lot more severe, obviously, than Invest 90L, because this will be actually making landfall and will be possibly a major hurricane equivalent tropical cyclone as it makes landfall. So you'll see the normal wind and rain, which can already be destructive enough, but depending on the track, you might actually also see a lot of surge, even more than you'd usually expect in a system like this. There's always some surge, but heading into the Delta region here, there's southerly wind in this one GFS run. It's just one run. Hopefully this changes, because it's pretty much a worst case scenario. We have southerly winds going right into the Delta, which if you can't quite see, is basically almost triangular in shape. And that means you'll have normal surge that is picked up by storms like these, but then it gets funneled to a smaller and smaller area until eventually it does hit the river, and that means you'll have much more severe shear as that water is piled into smaller and smaller areas. So you might see a lot of flooding if this does indeed happen due to the surge. But hopefully, once we do know where the center will be, maybe it will head more to the east, which would be a better case, because then the impacts would be less surge but more rain and wind. But definitely want to avoid a worst case scenario like this with significant storm surge in an already existing crisis. Otherwise, there isn't too much activity in the tropics. There's Vongfang over the Philippines, actually, but it is currently weakening and is dumping rain over there. And there's also Invest 97W, but it right now is weak. But if you have any criticism or questions or comments about my video, please let me know about those. And thanks for watching.